Hey guys, tonight we trudge through moonlit desert plains where the stars are so sharp they feel like they might pierce the dunes themselves. You pass through silence so absolute it hums broken only by the low creak of wooden carts and the snuffle of camels. Out here, the air is dry, biting, and absurdly cold for what's technically supposed to be a desert. And then just as your toes begin to freeze, you stumble upon a bizarre scene: men hauling blocks of ice from shallow trenches, carefully wrapping them in straw. You're not hallucinating. This is real. Welcome to Persia during the Safavid Empire. You probably won't survive this journey if you're expecting heaters, thermoses, or any sense of modern logic. This is about ancient ice desert snow and one of the weirdest and weirdly effective cooling tricks in history. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know who's listening from beneath a cozy blanket and who's still pretending to work. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squint into the dusk and see pale patches spread across the sand-glassy sheets, maybe an inch thick, glistening under the moonlight. Men in turbans and thick wool cloaks work in silence, dragging wooden scrapers across what looks like frozen irrigation canals. It's the middle of the night because that's the only time the desert drops low enough to make ice. These men are ice harvesters, a profession that sounds like fantasy and feels even more surreal to witness. And no, this isn't some seasonal party trick. This is industrial-level cooling, Safavid style. Mainstream historical fact: during the 17th century, Safavid Persia engineered entire cities with yakchal's ice houses designed to harvest, store, and distribute ice in desert climates. These domes weren't just architectural showpieces, they were daily infrastructure. But here's the fringe bit. Some accounts claim that the Safavids even added crushed saltpeter to accelerate freezing, suggesting early knowledge of chemical cooling, a method that wouldn't formally be discovered in Europe for another 150 years. Historians still argue whether this was science superstition or a very lucky accident involving donkey urine and snow. You pause near the edge of one canal, watching the water glint under starlight. The ice is surprisingly clear, surprisingly smooth. The trick, one worker tells you with a grin, is in the stillness. These trenches, long, shallow pools called gandabs, are designed to be as calm as a monk on sedatives. No ripples, no breeze, no disruption. Just pure, clean silence for freezing. Don't breathe too hard, the worker jokes. You'll ruin the sheet. You breathe anyway, just a little. All around the process unfolds with the same rhythm. Every winter night, fill the trench. By dusk, pray for cold return. At midnight, scrape by torchlight, haul to the yakchal by dawn. The men carry ice in straw bundles, not for insulation, but to reduce breakage. Turns out ice in the desert isn't just a miracle, it's also really fragile. One man's cart topples. A block shatters into glittering shards. No one scolds him, they just sigh, and someone scribbles in a notebook with a reed pen. It's not just ice, it's inventory. And you somehow feel like you're trespassing in a place where time and temperature do not obey your rules. In this cold desert night, snow lives without clouds. And the ancient world whispers, "We figured this out long before you showed up with your refrigerators." You follow the ice-hauling crew down a sloped path, flanked by adobe walls. Your breath fogging in the air. A strange sensation given the desert sand crunching underfoot. It's still hours before sunrise and the temperature teeters right on the edge of freezing. Every step kicks up dust and frost in equal measure, an awkward duet between summer and winter. At the bottom of the slope, you spot the frozen canals again. Dozens of them neatly arranged like organized veins in a sleeping giant. These aren't natural rivers. They're engineered on purpose and perfectly shallow. Just deep enough to let water freeze rapidly overnight, and just wide enough to be manageable by a single worker with a hooked wooden rake. Tonight's harvest has just begun. Torchlight flickers across the ice sheets, casting long shadows that dance like trembling ghosts on the adobe walls. You hear grunts of effort, the soft skitter of sandals, and then the sharp crack one after another as workers snap frozen water from the earth. The sound is clean, satisfying, like breaking the surface of a creme brulee with your spoon. You wince at the comparison. You're hungry now, and there's definitely no dessert in sight. A pair of jackals wail from beyond the ridge. Someone mutters something about evil spirits in jest, but you note how no one laughs. Mainstream historical fact ice was so valuable in Safavid Persia that it was counted in state inventories and taxed like wine or spices. In Isfahan, the capital, the ice harvest was managed by guilds with strict rules on labor quality and seasonal output. These weren't casual operations, they were regulated businesses. What you're watching is part logistics, part ritual. Each man knows his role. One breaks, one lifts, one wraps, one marks. No one speaks unless necessary. The rhythm is practiced centuries old. And here comes the fringe bit. Some Safavid chroniclers claim that the ice would crack more cleanly if the harvester kissed the ground before lifting the first slab. Was it humility, superstition? Historians still argue whether these rituals served any purpose beyond comfort or whether they subtly altered the harvester's posture, making the slab easier to extract. You lean in to observe more closely. The slabs are staggered on thick wooden sledges which creak and slide across boards laid over the sand. No wheels, they just sink. One man, short and broad-shouldered, tosses a handful of crushed reeds onto the trail ahead like breadcrumbs. This helps reduce friction, apparently. You nod, pretending that makes sense. Someone notices you watching. He chuckles and holds up a chunk of ice the size of a loaf of bread. For the king's bath, he jokes, and drops it into a straw basket that will soon be sealed and sent upriver. You want to ask who the king is. You want to ask what he'll do with a single loaf of ice. You don't. You just keep walking. A rooster cries somewhere in the distance. The sky is turning pale indigo now, dawn creeping over the Zagros Mountains. The harvesters move faster. The sun is the enemy. If even one beam touches the ice directly, you'll hear the hiss of melting. Time's up. They haul the last slabs with hurried grunts, load them into shaded carts, and vanish down the ridge like shadows dissolving into the light. You stand alone in the field of frozen canals. The ice is gone, the frost is thinning, and still, somehow the desert looks exactly the same, just a little more mysterious now. You walk back up the slope, your boots muddy from where the ice bled into the earth. And somewhere behind you, you swear you hear one last crack like the final blink of winter before it folds away again. You crest the final hill just as the sky shifts from violet to gold. The cold lingers on your fingertips, but already you feel it slipping. The ice may have survived the night, but now the race begins to keep it alive until midsummer. Below, tucked into the basin of the town, like a giant earthen cupcake, stands one of the strangest buildings you've ever seen. A dome, massive and tan, shaped like a smooth gumdrop, or maybe a badly folded fez, looms before you. It has no windows, no clear entrance, just thick, sloping walls that blend with the desert itself. You've arrived at the heart of Safavid ice engineering, the Yakchal. The word means ice pit, which doesn't sound very glamorous, but standing here you get the sense this thing could swallow 100 summers and still burp out a snowflake. It towers 2 or 3 stories high, built entirely from something that looks like clay, but smoother, stronger. There's a smell to it too, like dust mixed with lime, and a hint of something herbal. You step closer and run a hand along the wall. It's cool, not just from the shade. It's holding something inside. Mainstream historical fact. Yakchals were monumental refrigerators long before refrigerators were cool, pun aggressively intended. Built as early as the 4th century BCE and reaching peak design In the Safavid period, these structures used physics, geometry, and brilliant material science to store ice all year round without electricity. Here's the quirky part. They also stored food corpses, melons, dates, sometimes even whole sheep carcasses wrapped in spices and linen. Some locals swore the flavor improved with a frozen ferment, a term you never ever want to see on a dinner menu. Historians still argue whether this was intentional aging or just the desert version of, still smells okay. You finally find a narrow stairwell carved into the earth near the dome's base. It spirals downward, tight, dark, and damp. As you descend, you feel the temperature drop with every step. A soft drip echoes from below. You think of medieval crypts. You think of wine cellars. You think of a walk-in freezer run by monks. And then, the tunnel opens into a cavernous chamber, the core of the Yakchal. It's oddly quiet. The thick walls muffle sound. The ceiling rises like an upside-down tulip, directing warm air up and away. The air down here crisp, heavy. You exhale and see your breath again. Lining the floor are rectangular hollows, ice wells where the night's harvest will be stacked like stone bricks, each layer separated with reeds or straw. But there's more long, narrow vents pierce the upper walls, angled just so. These aren't random holes. They control airflow, channeling cool desert breezes downward while letting warm air escape through a central flue. Passive ventilation centuries ahead of its time. Someone above drops a bundle of straw-wrapped ice down a chute. It thuds into a pile nearby with a wet grunt. You flinch. It feels like someone just delivered winter via Amazon Prime. The material used to build this dome, not just clay, it's sarouge. A genius composite of sand lime ash, goat hair, and egg whites. Yes, egg whites. The resulting plaster is waterproof, heat-resistant, and has baffled modern engineers in restoration attempts. One Iranian scientist reportedly licked it to test the sealant and lost his appetite for 2 weeks. You take a few slow steps along the curved wall. Someone scratched a date into the surface, 1603. That's over 400 years ago. And the dome still stands. Still cool, still useful. You run your fingers across the inscription and feel the centuries hum beneath your skin. A man appears from a side tunnel, nods silently, and begins stacking the morning's ice. He doesn't look up. This is normal to him. Routine. You, however, are quietly losing your mind. Ice. In the desert, all year. No wires, no humming generators, just ancient math and a mud dome that breathes. And as you watch him work, you realize something strange. You don't hear the ice melting. You just hear it resting. You crouch beside the inner wall of the Yakchal, tracing the strange smoothness of the plaster with your fingers. It's cool, not just from the surrounding air, but from something else baked into the material. You tap the wall. It doesn't ring. It absorbs. Like it's been designed not to echo, not to vibrate. Like silence is part of the insulation. This isn't regular mud. This is sarouge, a miracle substance by pre-modern standards, and a headache for modern engineers. The mix sounds like a bizarre cooking experiment: sand, clay, lime, goat hair, and egg whites. And yet here you are sitting inside a dome made from the stuff still functioning centuries after it was built. Mainstream historical fact: sarouge was used throughout ancient Iran and Central Asia for any structure that needed to resist both water and heat. Bridges, canals, cisterns. It was so effective that some 16th century structures using it are still waterproof today, even under pressure. Archaeologists in Yazd once found sarouge-lined storage pits that had held water for years untouched, unspoiled. But here's the real fringe detail. Some restorers swear that the secret ingredient in high-grade sarouge was fenugreek seeds, ground into powder and mixed for scent, fungal resistance, and allegedly spiritual chill. Historians still argue whether this was apocryphal symbolic or just someone's 16th century version of essential oils gone rogue. Back inside the Yakchal, the silence deepens. You notice how even your footsteps seem muffled. That's by design. The thicker the dome, the fewer temperature fluctuations. And Saruj has this delightful little trick: it gets stronger when wet, meaning any condensation or melt from the ice reinforces the structure instead of weakening it. Somewhere, a modern concrete engineer just cried into their drafting tablet. You step through a side passage into what appears to be an older storage chamber. The walls are darker here, and the air sharper. Someone scrawled a tally mark series into the Saruj, perhaps tracking inventory. You spot a small recess filled with what might have once been citrus peels, long desiccated. Were they scenting the ice or warding off insects? You think about it for a moment. In a world before refrigeration, these domes weren't just utility, they were status. Only cities with enough scientific know-how, trade connections, and labor force could build and maintain one. And only the well-connected could access their bounty once summer arrived. If your cousin in Shiraz had snow in August, it meant more than luxury. It meant power. One of the workers comes down the chute with another slab. He wipes his brow and leans against the wall beside you. He says something in Farsi you don't quite catch, then shrugs, smiles, and taps the wall with affection. "Zende asked," he murmurs. "It is alive." You nod, not entirely understanding, but agreeing anyway. And it does feel alive. This place breathes. It exhales cool air and holds time like a whisper. You imagine the families who relied on it, the engineers who sketched its angles under oil lamps, the guards who once protected it from sabotage during ice shortages. Yes, those happened too. There's one 17th century account of rival towns sending donkeys to urinate in another city's freezing trench to contaminate the water. Petty, absolutely. Effective, arguably. Historians still debate whether that event really happened, or if it was just slander recorded by a bitter court historian with a flair for drama. You press your palm flat against the dome wall one last time before heading back up. The surface is cool, slightly damp, and undeniably ancient. Saruj doesn't just keep the cold in. It holds memories. And you wonder how many summers has this dome survived quietly, winning the war against time and heat. You emerge from the Yakchal like a mole blinking into daylight. The desert sun hasn't reached full strength yet, but already you can feel the shift. What had been a hushed world of condensation and cool shadows now sharpens into brightness. The contrast is jarring. You squint, step forward, and suddenly find yourself standing inside a massive geometric puzzle, one that doesn't look like much at first glance. Flat walls, long corridors, low barriers shaped like check marks and zigzags snake through the sand. But these aren't the walls of a fortress or garden. These are thermal shields, giant sun catchers and shade casters laid out with obsessive precision. Mainstream historical fact. Safavid engineers used geometry and orientation to control temperature long before the age of thermostats. The canals, freezing pools, and ice chutes were positioned at precise angles to maximize cold airflow and minimize sun exposure. Everything faced northeast. Not north, not east. Northeast. Why? Because it caught just the right amount of moonlight for passive freezing and avoided the brutal direct rays of sunrise. You step into one of the trenches. The mud brick walls tower just high enough to keep the floor in shadow. The temperature drops. It's barely noticeable, but it's there. You run a hand along the inside of the wall. Smooth, angled, still damp from the night's condensation. These aren't walls for people. They're for physics. Then comes the fringe tidbit. Some sources claim the Safavid builders designed these shadow walls based on astronomical charts aligning certain corners of the ice fields with lunar cycles to predict optimal freezing nights. Historians still argue whether this was proto-science or poetic nonsense. Did they really understand the moon's radiative influence, or were they just romanticizing the night sky? Either way, it worked. You step deeper into the labyrinth, your path looping and folding like origami. The layout isn't random. It channels wind. Even now, with no breeze to speak of, you feel a slight tug at your robe, air gently funneled by the wall. Geometry brushing past your knees as if the earth itself is trying to cool you. In one corner, a small depression holds a flat stone slab stained with what looks like melted sugar. It's not sugar. It's saltpeter, someone explains. Crushed and sprinkled into freezing trenches to accelerate ice formation. The locals knew that nitrate lowered the freezing point of water, even if they didn't know why. They just called it the frost maker. You pause at the base of a funnel-shaped wall where hot air is pulled upward and ejected through a narrow vent. This chimney isn't connected to any fireplace. It's a thermal siphon, an elegant solution that modern architecture textbooks sometimes call wind towers. But here you get the real version. Mud bricks, goat hair plaster, shadow math, your guide. If you can call the man quietly. Walking ahead of you, a guide taps the base of the wall with his walking stick. No metal, he says with a faint grin. Metal heats. It's true. These ancient systems use no metal in their construction. Nothing that could conduct heat and jeopardize the internal temperature. It's a rule followed so strictly that some records show workers fined for accidentally leaving a copper basin near the canal overnight. You sit on a low bench made of dried clay and covered with palm matting. The entire complex hums not audibly but thermally. You sense the equilibrium at work. The angles, the porous bricks, the moon-soaked canals. All of it orchestrated to do something wildly unnatural, keep ice alive in the desert. And yet the strangest part isn't the engineering, it's the silence. No pumps, no wires, no humming fans, just shade, earth, and angles working together in an eternal slow-motion miracle. You spot them just beyond the town's edge, silhouetted against the shimmering dunes like slow-moving punctuation marks camels. Their lumpy shadows stretch long across the ground, and their heads bob rhythmically, unconcerned with the miracle they carry. The ice has begun its next journey. Wrapped in straw and stacked inside wooden crates, the morning's harvest is now loaded onto camel caravans, Persia's mobile refrigerators. The animals groan with indifference, their woolly coats dusted with powder-fine sand and the occasional shard of frost. One chews lazily on a sprig of fennel, utterly unbothered by the fact that it's transporting a product more valuable than gold during the hottest months. Mainstream historical fact. Ice in the Safavid Empire wasn't just stored. It was transported sometimes for days across deserts and over mountain passes. Wealthy households, royal courts, and tea houses in distant cities like Shiraz, Qazvin, or even Herat would pay handsomely to receive blocks of ice before they melted. And when done properly with the right insulation, a carefully packed camel load could survive journeys of up to 10 days. You walk beside one of the handlers watching as he adjusts the load. He packs the crates tight with reeds, date palm husk, and bundles of hay, not just to cushion the ice, but to create a layered insulation system. Each element serves a function. Straw keeps the temperature low. Palm husk soaks up any meltwater. Reeds provide airflow without heat. And here's a curious tidbit: in some towns, they'd sneak mint leaves or lavender into the packing straw, not to preserve the ice, but to scent it. Because what good is summer snow if it doesn't smell like a garden? You ask the handler how far this shipment is going. He raises 5 fingers and points southeast. 5 days. Toward the mountains, maybe a noble family there is expecting chilled rosewater for a wedding. Or maybe someone just wants to feel the luxury of cold on their lips. Proof that even in this scorching empire, some people could command winter. The camels begin their slow trudge down the caravan road, a sun-bleached path flanked by crumbling milestone markers. Every few miles, a covered way station offers shade, water, and straw replacements. These aren't rest stops. They're part of a system, the ice chain, if you will. Historians still argue whether this system was formalized under state administration or evolved locally through guild traditions. Some say the Shah himself had a say in logistics. Others believe the merchants ran it like a cold mafia, silent, efficient, and never late. You fall in step with the last camel in the line. Its driver hums a tune as he goes low, nasal rhythmic. The song is older than memory, may be passed down through ice haulers for generations. You imagine a grandfather teaching it to a grandson by the campfire, his hands sketching Yakchal domes in the sand. The sun rises higher. Heat waves ripple. You wipe sweat from your brow and glance at the crates. No dripping, no leaks. The ice is holding. A desert breeze blows across your face, and for a moment, you swear it carries a chill not imagined, not metaphorical, but real. A thread of cold riding through the furnace of the Persian plateau, whispering, "Yes, I'm still here." And with every creak of wood and groan of camel, you realize something astonishing. This isn't just ice. It's infrastructure. It's ambition. It's defiance in crystal form, proof that humans once looked at a sand-choked horizon and said, "No, I want snow in July." You veer off the dusty road and follow the scent, floral, tangy, faintly sticky sweet, until it leads you toward the inner courtyard of a shaded home. A servant brushes past you with a silver tray, carefully balancing ceramic bowls filled with snow that glows like pearls. The aroma becomes unmistakable now, pomegranate and rosewater. You've stumbled into the world of Safavid sherbets, and no, not the frozen kind you're used to. These are the sophisticated chilled drinks of Persia's elite, part medicine, part refreshment, and entirely theatrical. Mainstream historical fact. Sherbet, from the Arabic sharba, meaning a drink, was a staple in Persian cuisine long before Westerners turned it into rainbow ice cream. Safavid versions used melted snow or crushed ice from the Yakchal, mixed with ingredients like sour, cherry, mint, tamarind, cinnamon, or orange blossom. Served during feasts or diplomatic receptions, they signaled hospitality, health, and quietly status. You're handed a goblet by a young attendant who doesn't ask questions. The rim is chilled, beaded with condensation. The first sip nearly makes you flinch. It's so cold, so fragrant, your tongue almost forgets it's in a desert. There's something addictive about it, tart pomegranate, dancing with sweet rose undercut by something earthy, maybe ground cardamom. And now, for the fringe detail. In royal households, sherbet wasn't just a drink, it was an art form. Some historians describe layered sherbets served in tall glasses where colored syrups and snows were carefully stacked like geological strata. Others recount a sherbet so cold it could crack a tooth if not warmed. One Safavid courtier wrote that the Shah's favorite flavor was crushed violet petal, with a splash of snowmelt aged in rosewood barrels. Historians still argue whether that was real or just exaggerated poetry meant to flatter the monarchy's eccentric palate. You wander through the courtyard watching the rituals unfold. A girl sits cross-legged, grating sugar loaf with a knife. A man stirs syrup in a copper basin set over a slow flame. Another ladles snow from a deep ceramic pot, careful not to disturb the bottom layer where meltwater collects. Someone plays a lute in the corner. It's not a party, it's just midday refreshment, but it feels like a small rebellion against the sun. One elderly guest dips a finger into her sherbet and touches it to her forehead. A blessing. A superstition. You make a mental note not to ask. Then, from the shaded alcove near the far end of the courtyard, the house steward appears. He carries something strange. A tray bearing what looks like miniature sculptures made of ice. Birds. Leaves. A delicate crescent moon. They shimmer in the light, impossibly intricate. You blink. One melts slightly at the tip. He frowns and replaces it immediately, muttering something about presentation standards. These aren't desserts, they're statements. Because in this world, chilled beauty matters. Ice is not merely useful, it's performative. An emblem of mastery over nature. And in the hands of Safavid hosts, sherbet becomes a silent flex proof that even in 110-degree heat, they could conjure frozen roses at a moment's notice. As you sit and sip, a servant brings you a second bowl, this one scented with saffron and crushed cucumber. You brace yourself, but it's oddly calming, almost sleep-inducing. And maybe that's the point. These chilled drinks weren't just for taste, they were meant to lower the body's fire, to temper the soul, to cool the blood, as old physicians would say. You lean back against the wall, eyes half closed, the goblet sweating in your palm. Here in the desert, you're drinking winter, and somehow that feels more powerful than magic. You're jolted back to your feet by the loud slap of a ledger hitting a marble tabletop. The mood has shifted. You've wandered into the back chambers of the estate, somewhere between the kitchen and the courtyard garden, and stumbled upon a scene that feels less like a tea party and more like a bureaucratic crime drama, but with snow. A man in deep blue robes stands over a stack of parchment, his mustache twitching with agitation. Across from him, another man, smaller, sweatier, ink-smudged, holds a reed pen like a dagger and waves his hand at an open crate of ice. The argument is rapid-fire, low-voiced, and somehow even colder than the ice being measured. Welcome to the Safavid Ice Quota Inspection. Mainstream historical fact: ice production and distribution during the Safavid era was so central to urban life that it was regulated by local officials. In major cities like Isfahan, Yazd, or Kashan, guilds of ice makers had to report inventories, harvest yields, and usage logs. Failure to meet quotas could lead to fines, loss of storage rights, or worse, public ridicule for inefficiency. You inch closer, pretending to admire a potted basil plant. On the table, you spot a list written in a slanting hand: names, dates, weight estimates, and curious little tick marks. It looks like an ordinary invoice until you notice the margin. Small looping symbols in red ink. They resemble snowflakes, or maybe warning signs. You catch part of the conversation. Oh, the dome in Sector 4 yielded 5 mans less than reported. And yet the ice sent to the governor's house is twice the allotment. Curious, isn't it? Curious. The scribe stutters, rubs his neck, then points at the ceiling. There was melt. The saruj cracked. Then why is your dome cooler than mine? The inspector shoots back. Are you storing secrets in there or just cheating the guild? Here's your fringe tidbit. Some towns during the Safavid period used ice tokens, clay discs or slivers of painted wood, to track ice entitlements. They functioned like cold currency. 1 token per crate, stamped with a date and location. Losing or forging a token was considered theft of temperature. Historians still argue whether this system was practical accounting or an overly theatrical obsession with fairness. But the evidence is solid. One merchant's estate was reportedly raided in 1642 for hiding unregistered ice. You glance at the floor. Sure enough, a broken token lies near the door, blue paint flaking off its edge. The inspector scribbles something furiously, then slams the ledger shut. I'll be sending someone tonight. Pray your dome doesn't leak. He storms out. The scribe exhales like he's aged 10 years. In 10 minutes, then sits down and wipes his ink-stained fingers on his robe. He never trusts the shadow readings he mutters. As if the sun's angle lies, you offer a non-committal nod and retreat into the corridor, letting the scent of basil fade behind you. You hadn't expected bureaucracy to haunt a world of domes and sherbets. But here it is, cold, calculated, and quietly powerful. Ice was currency, and like all currencies, it required surveillance. You pass a small alcove where 2 boys are quietly playing with dice made of bone. One whispers, "My uncle hides extra snow in the prayer niche." The other giggles, "That's a sin. Only if the imam finds out." Even the children know. Safavid ice wasn't just about comfort. It was regulated frost, a commodity woven into daily life tied to status, trust, and official records. You pause to imagine a man, quill in hand, calculating his city's temperature balance sheet. Snowfall as math, frost as math, and somewhere a man sweating in the corner of a clay dome, praying the numbers don't melt before morning. You drift back into the outer lanes of the city where alleys twist like lazy fingers, and the domes of smaller yakchals rise behind mud brick homes like sleeping giants. Here, the air feels different, less official, more territorial. Every few blocks, a new dome juts up from the earth, and each one bears a different mark: a sunburst, a palm tree, a half moon etched into the plaster. These are not imperial structures. These are neighborhood yakchals. And as you wander through their shadows, you begin to notice something: everyone thinks their dome is the best. Mainstream historical fact: during the Safavid period, rival cities and even rival districts within a city boasted fiercely about the size, shape, and output of their yakchal. Local pride tied itself to the coldest dome, the clearest ice, or the most elegant freeze rituals. Some regions even built their domes taller, not for storage, but purely to outshine their neighbors' silhouettes at sunset. You pass a small courtyard where a group of men are sitting on upturned buckets arguing loudly about wall angles. One gestures with a twig on the ground, drawing the curve of his district's dome. Yours is too steep. Hot air pools at the top. Only if you forget the northern vent. My uncle built ours with crushed fig bark in the plaster. That's why it holds into June. A boy watches them while holding a bowl of cracked ice, slurping it like soup. He looks up at you and shrugs. Our ice tastes better, he says with perfect confidence, then slurps louder. It's both absurd and weirdly charming. And here's your fringe detail. One obscure Safavid poem written in the 1600s compares rival yakchals to minarets of frost, suggesting that some towns treated their ice domes as if they were religious symbols. Historians still argue whether this was metaphorical or literal. Some say domes were blessed by local clerics before the freezing season began. Others insist it was just architectural bragging with a divine twist. You round a corner and nearly trip over a stack of crates marked in turquoise ink, property of House Yadagari, do not mix with Ghaffari ice. The warning is dramatic and deeply sincere: mixing rival snow. That's scandalous. You wonder what would happen if someone secretly swapped a few slabs. Probably nothing. Or maybe war. In the next alley, a wall bears graffiti scrawled in careful Farsi script. Our ice never cracks. Someone else has crossed out never and written unless it rains. You step through an open gate into yet another courtyard. A short dome squats in the center, its walls covered with tiles bearing little blue stars. This one is clearly well tended. A man sits near it sipping tea with a look of satisfaction only a retired yakchal master could wear. He nods at you. You came from the west. You nod. They still brag about their spiral flu. You nod again. He sips. Waste of air. Our dome sings. He says it with such casual authority that you don't dare argue. You just smile and keep walking. And as the afternoon heat builds, you realize something strange. These rivalries, these whispered insults and gentle bragging rights, they're not about control. They're about continuity. These domes are part of identity. To live here is to belong to a dome, to praise it, to defend it, to pass its cold secrets to the next generation like heirlooms of ice. In the heart of the desert, pride doesn't come from owning a well. It comes from owning winter. You feel it before you see it, a dry, shimmering heat that presses down like a velvet hand. The kind of heat that silences birds, stops clocks, and makes shadows curl at the edges. And then through the haze you spotted a group of children in a nobleman's courtyard shrieking with laughter as they pelt each other with something that seems impossible. Snowballs. Yes, it's the middle of July. And you are watching a miniature snow war unfold in the central garden of a house that clearly doesn't believe in playing fair with the seasons. Mainstream historical fact. Wealthy. Safavid families, particularly nobles and high-ranking officials, used yakchal stored ice to cool their homes and entertain guests even in the peak of summer. Courtyards were sometimes rigged with underground ducts that piped cool air from ice chambers into shaded alcoves. Some even scattered shaved ice across the tiles to briefly lower the ambient temperature before guests arrived. You lean against a date palm and watch as one boy takes careful aim, winding up dramatically before launching a clump of crushed frost at his older sister. It explodes across her silk tunic and she squeals not from pain but from delight. You weren't expecting this. Sherbets, yes. Cool baths? Sure. But ice battles. A servant rushes by, arms full of fresh slush wrapped in linen. He tosses handfuls of it into a basin set on polished stone where another man kneads it into something softer, fluffier, artificial snowfall. This isn't just cooling the body, it's a kind of performance art. A demonstration that this household doesn't just own cold, it plays with it. Fringe detail incoming. There are scattered reports, rare and debated, that some elite household staged entire winter festivals during the hottest months, complete with snow mounds, iced pathways, and even small ice sculptures of mythical beasts. Historians still argue whether these were real symbolic or exaggerated traveler tales. One Italian visitor wrote of a fountain of icicles that wept into a bowl of fire, which sounds poetic or like someone drank too much rose liqueur and passed out near a water pipe. Back in the courtyard, the children have moved on to burying fruit in the ice. Tiny golden apricots, pale green cucumbers, and something that looks suspiciously like sugar-dusted melon cubes. You watch as they pretend to find them like buried treasures, squealing at the contrast of sweet and cold. One child offers you a bite-sized snow-wrapped plum. It's sweet, tart, frosty enough to make your teeth ache. You pretend not to wince. The steward of the house appears now, nodding politely. He gestures toward a tiled alcove where a low fountain trickles softly beside hanging ice blocks suspended in canvas slings. They drip rhythmically into stone basins. The sound is hypnotic. These, he says, are from last December's freeze. He says it without pride. Just information. You glance at the drip. One block cracks ever so slightly, shedding a sliver of ice. You imagine how far it's traveled first, from a freezing pool, then into a dome now strung in velvet shade like a trophy. And here's the oddest part: it works. The courtyard is cooler, not much, just a few degrees, but enough to feel it on your neck, enough to make you want to stay. This isn't just luxury, it's climate theater, a ritual of reversal. Summer becomes winter, heat becomes play, ice becomes joy. You sit on the steps and watch the children return to their game. Snowballs fly. Peals of laughter rise into the saffron air. And for one improbable hour in the desert's heart, you forget what month it is. You follow a narrow corridor lined with silk curtains and step into a space that smells of saffron incense and something unmistakably cold sharp, like steel, and sweet, like nostalgia. The walls are mosaicked with turquoise and lapis, and the floor gleams with polished marble. A long banquet table dominates the room, stretching toward a throne-like seat at the far end where silver platters gleam beneath mirrored lanterns. But it's not the goldware or the embroidered cushions that catch your eye. It's the centerpieces, blocks of crystal clear ice, some shaped into peacocks, others into cascading waterfalls. One even molded into a miniature cypress tree stand along the table like ghosts of winter summoned to attend dinner. Welcome to the ambassador's banquet, where ice isn't just a convenience, it's diplomatic weaponry. Mainstream historical fact. Safavid courts used ice as a form of political theater during summer state banquets. By presenting foreign envoys with elaborate chilled dishes, sherbets, and frozen centerpieces, the hosts were subtly demonstrating the empire's command over nature. Guests recorded these experiences with awe, noting the contradiction between the scorching heat outside and the frozen delicacies on their plates. You approach the table slowly, amazed by the craftsmanship. One ice sculpture holds a bowl of chilled dates arranged in the petals of an icy lotus. Another presents a pyramid of candied quince atop a base that glows blue from refracted light. A servant expression blank with practiced serenity fans the display with a plume of ostrich feathers. Not to cool it, but to keep the illusion alive longer. Here's the fringe detail. One 17th century Venetian envoy swore that the Shah once served a melon filled with snow and lit from inside with a firefly lamp, which he called a second moon. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor or memory, but the line appears in two different diaries, so perhaps it was both. You sit on a cushion near the wall and watch as courtiers begin to arrive robed in green gold navy, each greeted with a fluted cup of snow-chilled nectar. No one remarks on the temperature. They simply drink it with the same grace they'd extend to a ceremonial poem or the stroke of a calligrapher's brush. The ambassador arrives last, draped in red with silver embroidery. He bows, touches his heart, and accepts a goblet from the steward. He sips. His eyebrows rise not in shock but in respect. This is ice with purpose. Every chilled bite, every frost-touched fig, every pear carved into the shape of a gazelle. It all says the same thing. We are not ruled by this desert. You lean back and observe the ripples of influence spreading across the hall. The guests whisper about the sculptors, the flavors, the ice's clarity. You hear phrases like made from spring water in the Alborz and cut before the sun rose, never touched by hands. These aren't ingredients, they're storylines. And they work. The ambassador smiles more easily now. He toasts more readily. You watch him nod at a general across the table, his earlier stiffness melting almost like the dome-chilled peach slices on his plate. The deal, it seems, is already half won, and not a word has been spoken. The ice speaks for them. You leave the banquet chamber in a daze, the images of melting peacocks and moonlit melons still swimming behind your eyes. But something tugs at your curiosity, something older, deeper. You duck into a quieter hallway lined with shelves and brittle scrolls, and there you find them, two men hunched over a map by candlelight, mid-debate. Their fingers trace triangles and spirals, not battle plans or borders, but dome designs. One murmurs something about Egyptian air traps. The other scoffs and mutters Persian cooling geometry. You've entered the icy battleground of ancient engineering pride. Mainstream historical fact. Though Persia's Yakchals were among the most advanced passive refrigeration systems of their time, similar cooling structures had existed earlier in Egypt and even along the Indus Valley. Yet the Safavids took the basic concept and elevated it into a science integrating airflow theory, material chemistry, and even regional microclimate analysis. And they weren't shy about their accomplishments. One of the men gestures toward a scroll that depicts a pyramid-shaped structure with fluted sides. This design traps air, he says. But our domes breathe. His companion nods, tapping the sketch of a spiral vent with reverence. And ours whisper, he replies. You sit nearby pretending to read a scroll while your ears drink every word. Now, here's the juicy fringe bit. Some Safavid-era documents contain veiled jabs at other civilizations' ice methods. One anonymous manuscript calls the Egyptian method stubborn and stiff like Pharaoh's heart, while praising Persian domes as humble, porous, and patient. Historians still argue whether these texts reflect nationalist pride or were just poetic posturing passed around like inside jokes among architects. The men continue, voices rising and falling like a slow-moving wave. They argue about wind catchers in the Nile Delta versus mountain airflow in Yazd, about whether funnel-shaped vaults or dome-shaped cavities stored less meltwater. One pulls out a cracked ceramic fragment etched with numbers, an early temperature log he claims taken with water clocks and shadow sticks. You inch closer and spot a series of dots and dashes beside the sketch of a dome. Not decoration, not numbers, code. The early Safavid engineers weren't just theorizing, they were testing, recording how quickly water cooled at different wall angles, noting how sarouj mixtures responded to humidity. This wasn't just tradition, it was data. A draft slips off the shelf behind you, an old sheaf of notes with red margins. The ink has faded, but you can still make out the phrase, "He who masters shade may sculpt time." You stare at it longer than you mean to, because that's what they were really doing, wasn't it? These weren't merely ice makers. They were time sculptors stretching the memory of winter into the belly of summer, bending climate to narrative, making history edible in sherbet form. One of the scholars finally sighs and folds the parchment. Perhaps he concedes Egypt cooled first, but Persia made it beautiful. You smile at that. Because even here, in a dim room full of dusty scrolls and ghost arguments, you can feel the quiet pride of those who believed that cold could carry culture. The next morning, you return to the Yakchal, but something feels off. Where once there was quiet industry, now there's silence. Not the meditative kind that wraps around a sleeping dome, but the hollow kind, the kind that follows abandonment. The freezing pools are dry, the straw baskets are gone, the air once tinged with frost and clay is flat. Still, you walk slowly through the field, crunching over cracked mud where canals once glistened under moonlight. The trenches are flaking. The mud brick guide walls have slumped. The familiar hum of function has slipped into decay. You've arrived at the slow collapse of the cold chain. Mainstream historical fact. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many traditional yakchals and ice systems across Persia were gradually abandoned due to the rise of industrial refrigeration and piped water infrastructure. New colonial influence brought modern engineering, and with it a shift in priorities. Domes crumbled, canals dried. Ice once sacred became ordinary. You duck into the dome's base. The inner chamber, once alive with chilled breath and dripping precision, is now quiet. Dust carpets the floor. A reed basket lies sideways in the corner, split down the middle like a dreary smile. The temperature isn't cold anymore, just shaded. Outside, two children chase each other with plastic water bottles. You watch as they squirt each other, laugh, then run back toward a small house with a humming air conditioner in the window. You blink. That sound, low constant synthetic, was once unimaginable in this place. Here's the fringe element. Some restorationists claim that modern refrigeration didn't just displace the old systems, it killed the ritual. One engineer in Shiraz reportedly wept upon hearing his son say, "Why do we need domes when we have a freezer?" Historians still argue whether the loss of these passive cooling systems was inevitable, or whether it was simply inconvenient for the kind of progress that measures value in voltage, not silence. You walk further into the courtyard where vines have begun to creep up the outer walls of the dome. Nature, ever patient, is reclaiming its space. A young man nearby is sweeping the yard. He pauses to watch you, then gestures to the cracked dome. "My grandfather used to work here," he says simply. You nod. "Did he teach you how it worked?" He shrugs. "A little. But nobody needs it now. We have fridges." Then he pauses as if remembering something and adds, "But he said the ice here tasted better." That line sticks with you, not because it's poetic, but because it's true. The ice did taste better. Not because it was purer or colder, but because it carried effort. It carried winter in straw. It carried midnight prayers and moonlight engineering and guild ledgers and pomegranate snow. You place your palm on the outer wall. The sarouj has faded. No more cool vibration, no more hum. Just a relic, but not forgotten. Because even now, somewhere in the folds of this broken dome, the memory of cold still lingers, waiting. You don't expect to see it rising on the edge of a university campus nestled awkwardly between a parking lot and a physics department, but there it is. A new Yakchal. It's smaller than its ancestors. Smoother, less weathered, but unmistakable. The domed shape, the northeast-facing shadow trench. The vented crown, all modern recreations of something once considered obsolete. You walk toward it slowly, half in disbelief, half in awe. This isn't nostalgia, it's a revival. Mainstream historical fact. In recent years, Iranian architects and engineers alongside conservationists and climate scientists have begun rebuilding Yakchals, using ancient techniques sometimes mixed with modern tweaks. These new domes serve as sustainable cooling models, showcasing how ancient passive refrigeration could be reintroduced to modern architecture in the age of climate anxiety and rising energy costs. You step closer. Two students are mixing sarouge by hand in a large clay tub. Not cement, not concrete. Actual sarouge. You can smell the lime and ash. You see the goat hair. One of them grins and says, "We watched a YouTube tutorial, and then 5 old men came and told us we were doing it wrong." Fringe. Detail time in one project in Isfahan. Students discovered that mixing the sarouge under a waxing crescent moon supposedly increased its strength. A grandmother from Yazd insisted this was just how it's done. Historians still argue whether this is lunar superstition or a holdover from water clock-based construction calendars, but the domes made that week haven't cracked. Inside the new Yakchal, the walls are bright and unblemished. A small panel on the side tracks interior temperature using a solar-powered meter. You squint at the readout 12 degrees. Not freezer cold, but cold enough, especially in a place where the outside air is pushing 38 degrees. The engineer leading the project waves you in. "We're testing it with vegetables," she says. "Carrots, beets, citrus, seeing how long we can hold freshness without electric refrigeration. Eventually, we want to store vaccines." You blink. Vaccines. She nods. Rural clinics, nomadic settlements. If we can make portable yakchals, mini domes, or even saddle-sized pouches, why not use them where fridges don't work? And just like that, you feel it again. That defiance. That idea that cold isn't just a comfort, it's a tool. A right. A statement that even the hottest, harshest places deserve preservation. Dignity, respite. You walk the perimeter of the dome as the sun begins to dip. The breeze shifts, catching on the angled vent slits. It moves past your shoulder like a whisper, almost as if the dome is breathing again. Behind you, a wall bears fresh chalk scribbles in Persian script. A translation has been scrawled underneath. "The desert forgets nothing. Neither should we." You linger for a long while, tracing your fingers across the edge of a plaster test slab. The texture is right. The smell is right. And somewhere buried in this intersection of memory and math, you feel it. The Yakchal lives again. You return one last time just before dawn, drawn not by curiosity but by a quiet pull in your chest. The old dome is still there, slouched against time, softened by centuries. But this morning it feels aware of you. You step through the broken gate and cross the courtyard in slow silence. No one is here. Sis, the wind is still. Even the birds seem reluctant to speak. You open the creaking door at the dome's base and step inside into a breath of coolness that greets you like a memory. It's not cold, not like it once was, but the air is unmistakably different, thicker, weighted with quiet. You let your eyes adjust. The ice wells are empty, but the shape of them remains like footprints pressed into the past. You sit on the lowest step where merchants once whispered tallies and workers once unwrapped dawn-frosted bundles. There's a kind of hush here that's not about absence, it's about persistence. Mainstream historical fact. A few ancient yakchals, particularly those in Yazd, Kerman, and Kashan, have never been demolished. Even if unused, they've been kept intact as cultural landmarks, often incorporated into city planning or education programs. They still stand even if they no longer freeze. And here comes one final fringe whisper. A folktale tells of a yakchal that still sings during the solstice, letting out a hollow moan through its flue at midnight, as if mourning summer's heat or calling winter back. Historians still argue whether these stories stem from real acoustic phenomena or just the ghostly acoustics of curved chambers and wind. You lean your head against the sarouge wall and close your eyes. The dome creaks once, not a collapse, just breath. The longer you sit, the more you feel it, the sense that you're not inside a structure. You're inside a memory, one shaped like clay, strengthened by salt, smoothed by sweat, whispered into being by moonlight and math. And though the world has changed, though we've built compressors and coils and sleek steel refrigeration units, something here still works. Not mechanically, spiritually. Because this wasn't just about ice. It was about belief. Belief that the cold could be caught. That summer could be softened. That humans and all their ingenuity could bend heat to kindness and build machines of silence. You stand finally and place your hand on the wall. It's warm now, but the warmth feels earned. As if the dome is telling you thank you for remembering, and outside the sky has lightened. The first bird sings. The desert blinks awake. The dome remains. You step outside and breathe in the early air, softer now, still tinted with the dust of old snow and the ghost of straw. The courtyard is silent again, but not empty. It holds things, moments, rituals, rhythms. You feel them like echoes pressing into your spine. You wander a little more slowly now. The shadows stretch longer behind the Yakchal. Its dome, once strange, once impossible, is just a silhouette now. A curve on the earth that the sun will soon swallow, but for now it stands. Quiet, honest, unmoving. You pause beneath the arch fingers trailing the edge of the doorframe and imagine a time when every sound here meant something. A grunt of effort, a splash of water, a prayer whispered into a frozen canal. Even now, your own breath feels slower, your heartbeat gentler. These were people who learned to listen to heat and silence, who saw in frost not just relief but beauty, structure, purpose. You walk back down the path as the light shifts gold and peach, the wind brushing your sleeve like a farewell. You don't look back. You don't need to. The dome will still be there, waiting, breathing, always remembering. Now close your eyes. Let the hush of sarouj and shadow settle over you. Let the old cold cradle your thoughts. Let the ice carry you to sleep.